Greetings everybody, Steve the Amateur Historian, coming to you from southwest Portland, fairly close to the Willamette River. It's like a couple blocks that way, but there's Willamette Park over there, which is where I want to get to. I just need to turn down Texas Street right here, and once I do, I'll be literally beelining it towards Macadam Avenue, which I have to cross, and then getting into the park, and as close to the river as I can get, because this is actually a river story that I'm about to bring to you all. If I can, I think I can, I can't tell from this perspective. Whatever the case, I'm going to get in there so that I can bring you all a fresh new episode of Historic Murders of Portland. Water style. River style? Probably, I know this is where I want to be, probably should have picked a spot with a traffic light so I could cross what is essentially a busy highway here. Good job, amateur historian, you dunce. Thank God there's a traffic light just one block up. So I'm going up to Nevada Street, I guess, instead of Texas, but here's this cool old store. I think historically speaking it was a store. I believe this building was built in 1880, so it's like a, it's got this very cool old school storefront, and then the columns just to make it even classier. So I'm glad I got to walk by this while I prepare for something else. All right, okay, here we go. Good, perfect, an entryway. That's what I was hoping for. So it's actually better that I went this way instead of that way. Probably would have taken me forever to get to the park. But this is Willamette Park. And I don't know how long this park has been here, but I don't know and I don't believe it was here back at the time that this story happened. You have got to be kidding me. I dropped my notes. They're gone. I had them like 2 blocks ago. This is the only part I ran through. I knew they were feeling loose in my pocket. Give me the walk signal. I need to find my notes. Somebody's just gonna stumble onto some notes about a murder case in this area and be befuddled. One thing's for damn sure, I ain't backtracking that far. Was I on this side of the street, or was I on that side? I kind of jogged across the street. Maybe it's just a sign I shouldn't do this video. I can't handle this. My GoPro's gonna die soon, so I literally have minimal battery life. Oh my god. I think they just... Wait, no way. Please, what are the odds of this? Oh, you've been rain damaged. Oh, but I found you. Anyway, today I'm bringing you the 1913 murder of Charles A. Broddie. The crap I put myself through just to make a video. But here we are, we're at Willamette Park, which serves 2 purposes. The scene of the crime and my hopes of using a public restroom, if one is available. One of the primary reasons I don't think this park existed back then outside of the fact that this was almost 110 years ago, is the fact that I was able to figure out almost exactly where Charles Broddie and his family lived, because it said they lived more or less just off of Texas Street, which leads me to believe, and I could be wrong, but if I'm wrong, the newspapers were wrong first and led me astray, but it leads me to believe that these streets that all end at Macadam, so this park can be here, once went all the way through and pretty much down by the river. So, with the description that they lived down here near Texas Street, I was able to line up where Texas Street is with this area down by the river, and it lines up really closely to this little roundabout. So I had an actual element of this park to line up with the street, which means the Broddies lived down on the river somewhere around here, you know, probably anywhere from about there to about there in this region. And this area was lined, just, you know, you see there's still a beach down there, but this area was lined with houseboats, scows. Am I saying that right? Scows? It's S-C-O-W. I don't really see how else it could be pronounced. And, you know, it was houseboats that a lot of people were living in right here. And Charles Broddie and his family lived in one of those houseboats. And they had a neighbor, a guy named Peter Muller. And Peter Muller was apparently, I don't know if he was just a ruffian or he had to have this title, but he was known as the King of Scowtown. Which leads me to believe the mess of scows down by the river here, this was called Scowtown. Maybe there was just a lot more here than other places. I don't know. But anyway, they both lived on their boats on the river. So I'm trying to make this a little easier since it's starting to rain a lot. I need to sit down, but I don't want my butt to get soaking. So maybe one for each butt cheek. We're going to try it. This video is a train wreck. This is such a train wreck. Let's try this. I think it's working. Okay. Anyway, I'm angling you a little. Let's maybe just a bit. Try to keep your ankles slightly down so the rain won't hit you. Uh-oh. Nope, wait. There we go. My butt's getting wet now. Okay. So anyway, we're making lemonade with some really old lemons. It is early on August 22nd, 1913. And when I say early on, I mean it's the early morning hours. It's sometime after midnight. Charles Broddie goes over to Peter Muller's scow. And they're hanging out there, they're having fun, they're drinking. And they're apparently having a pretty detailed conversation about guns and about marksmanship. Seems like there's a lot of dick measuring going on in this regard. And it's hard to say exactly what happens, but it seems like they hang out for a bit. Sometime after 2 a.m., Charles Broddie leaves Muller's scow, goes back to his own, and for whatever reason, you know, he's there with his family. Him and his wife are still wide awake. They have 3 children, one of whom is a baby in bed. Even though it's pushing 3 in the morning, him and his wife are, you know, wide awake. I guess they're night owls. They're hanging out, and all of a sudden Peter Muller shows up. And he's even more drunk than he was before, and he's got his gun with him. He wants to keep talking about guns and marksmanship. He's like, look at this gun I got, man. So that was not working. I couldn't keep the rain off the lens. But anyway, so Peter Muller, who apparently, I mean, he has the name the King of Scowtown. It wouldn't surprise me if he just gave himself that name. He probably thinks he's hot stuff. He probably thinks he can do whatever he wants, so he kind of ingratiates himself into the Broddie household. And it's the middle of the night. Their kids are trying to sleep. They don't want their drunken neighbor wandering in, waving a gun around. So, you know, they're kind of like, okay, yeah, that's great. You got a gun. We just spent, like, a couple hours at your place talking about guns. Go home and go to sleep, you jackass. But Peter Muller, he kind of wants to show off a little bit. And he actually pulls the gun out, and to show off his marksmanship, he actually fires off a shot inside their houseboat with the children there. needless to say, this pisses off Charles Broddie and his wife, Minnie Broddie. And now they're like, all right, no, like, get out of our house now. But, you know, Peter Muller's still drunk. He probably isn't aware how messed up what he just did was. And he's not going willingly. So Charles Broddie is, you know, he's already annoyed now. Now he's probably getting pretty pissed off about this whole ordeal. And he aggressively approaches Peter Muller and is like, get out of my home. And they start arguing, they start bantering, and one of these guys is drunk with a gun, and so Minnie sees trouble on the horizon. And by her account of events, she rushes up and gets in between them and is trying to push them apart. But Peter Muller, I guess, has had it. He literally reaches over Minnie with his gun, shoots Charles Broddie at point-blank range, right through the chest. Needless to say, Charles Broddie was dead pretty quickly. And it's so tragic. The sound of the gunfire roused their kids from bed. Their two children that weren't babies and were able to get up and walk come out, and they have to see their dad on the ground, bleeding out of his chest, dying. Their mom probably freaking the hell out. And then just Peter Muller there with a gun. So it's one of these situations, this happened a lot in Portland, where, like, I already look at those details and then I look back at the time in question and I'm like, there was no way a first-degree murder was going to stick in a case like this, because even with Peter Muller's reckless behavior, the fact that he allowed that situation to happen by choosing to drink and choosing to bring a gun to a neighbor's house and then fire the gun in their house. All those things, and that's just leading up. That's not even including the actual shooting of Charles Broddie right in the chest. But the problem is, this didn't seem to be premeditated whatsoever. It seemed like up to that point, Broddie and Muller had had a pretty cordial friendship together. I mean, they literally, right before this, they were spending time hanging out on Muller's scow, just shooting the breeze. So there was nothing about this that seemed premeditated. And suffice to say, Muller was drunk. So any defense attorney could make the argument, hey, well, if he was sober, then... And, you know, you kind of blow a first-degree murder beef to pieces just with that. And we switch to the iPhone, which I realized I could do to save some battery on this old boy, and I'm undercover, so I don't have to worry about the rain messing with me. But this is a scenario, this usually doesn't happen. Usually I don't really write my personal opinions into the notes that I take on certain cases because I know I'm going to read it and remember it later on. But, you know, I obviously was not a big fan of Peter Muller and his actions, and I just noticed that there's some side notes in here. Okay, so Muller, as he remembers it, he of course has a cloudy memory, doesn't really remember the shooting. They never do when they're drunk. Even if they do, they'll always say they didn't. Then it makes it just more like they were more drunker than they actually were. And it's like, I don't even remember killing someone. How could I have done it? So he's apprehended, and he is brought up on a second-degree murder charge, probably mostly because he was drunk. And he calls his dad over in Norway, literally like, Daddy, I need you to come and help me. I am in peril. This guy who's the King of Scowtown and a big badass and a guy who knows all about guns and marksmanship thinks he's hot shit. He literally has to call his dad to pretty much come and try to help with his defense, and of course present the claim that I'm not really a bad guy, I'm a good little boy. And I wrote in the above the notes I took in relation to that, I wrote, little bitch big man with a gun but has to call daddy over to try and save him. Big pussy. And of course, I mean, his dad served no purpose except to just try to paint his son like he was a saint. Because after all, Peter Muller's father was there when the murder happened, and Peter Muller's dad couldn't possibly have a biased opinion on the matter. So it was just desperation, because this guy was kind of up a creek without a paddle. And the story, as I brought it to you so far, that was the account that Minnie Broddie presented, which was Mueller came over drunk, started waving his gun around, took a shot. That pissed off Charles. Charles started getting aggressive and trying to get him out of his place. Minnie tried to step in between them and break them up, and that is when the shooting took place. Now that is Minnie's perspective on things. Fast forward a couple of months, it's October 1913. Peter Mueller is now on trial, and things get a little shaken up because there's this guy named William Rose who, according to the defense for Peter Mueller, was at the scene. And there was no mention by Minnie. It was just Minnie, Charles, their family, and then Peter Mueller showed up, and that was it. But according to the defense, this William Rose guy is there. And William Rose is friend. It doesn't really say what his relationship was to Charles Broddie, but he's kind of friends with Peter Mueller. So this is all a little bit suspicious. And according to William Rose's account of events, and of course the prosecution would try to come back and say, well, you were never there, this is all made up. William Rose said he was at the scene and that both of the Brodies were trying to hold back Mueller. Both Minnie and Charles were trying to push him out aggressively. Probably wasn't provoked by the fact that the guy fired a gunshot in their house. Then again, they would probably argue that that never even happened. And that Mueller and that Minnie was hitting him. Pretty much they were both pushing him, and Minnie was beating on him, and he broke free and opened fire. So it was kind of makes it even more like it was this spur of the moment thing, and it makes it look like he felt endangered. They can maybe argue this was self-defense. Of course, a guy's random wife punching you a few times justifies you pulling out a gun and shooting the husband. So that was the William Rose side of things, and it really didn't make a whole lot of sense. And again, the argument was put forward that, hey, this guy wasn't even there. But it was found that there apparently was some blood leading from the Brodies' home to where William Rose lived. So, in a simply put, you can make the argument oh, well, here's proof. He was obviously there. And it is kind of suspicious, the fact that this guy had, he obviously got some blood on him and tracked it. But it's just interesting. That seems pretty definitive in that realm. But it was the perspective of the prosecution that this guy was never there, and that this guy was friends with Mueller, so they probably, there's probably some inner workings done that Rose agreed to, kind of fabricate this own personal story, claim he was there, because at that point it would just be Mueller's word versus Minnie Brodie's word, and if Rose is there to defend Mueller's word, that gives him a better shot. But the problem with all that is that was the only place that the blood led to. So why didn't it lead directly to Mueller's place? Mueller fled the scene, and if Rose was there, what are the odds that he would get blood on him and Mueller wouldn't? He was right there. It didn't make sense. So suddenly the perspective that, oh, well, this is obviously, William Rose must have tracked this blood. All of a sudden it was determined, well, wait a minute. What happened was Mueller probably fled the scene, immediately knew he was in trouble, and he tracked that blood to William Rose's place, and then they were able to converse on matters. Now, I couldn't really get a full direct description of how Mueller was apprehended, how much later he was apprehended, whether he was at William Rose's place when he was apprehended or what. And by Mueller's own account, again, he claims he's all hazy in the head, and the only thing he really remembers is pretty much being he remembers the brutality he received from the police. He was grabbed. He said an officer that had apprehended him had punched him. That probably knocked him out because he didn't really remember anything after that. And then he just eventually remembered waking up and he was handcuffed to a post, just kind of left there. And that was all he really claimed he remembered. So there wasn't really any description I could find in the limited newspaper articles I could find on the matter about the circumstances under which he was apprehended, where he was, how long after the shooting of Broddie that happened. But that was kind of how things began to shift. Was, oh no, this was Mueller tracking blood to Rose, which actually added to the idea that him and Rose spoke to each other immediately after. So now you suddenly have William Rose making this claim, oh yeah, I was there. And it really doesn't make any sense for him to be there. Like, it makes sense potentially for Mueller and Broddie to be there in the middle of the night because Mueller and Broddie had just been spending time together talking about guns. And Mueller's all drunk and he comes over with a gun. Like, that makes sense, but where does William Rose fit into all that? He wasn't on Mueller's scow hanging out and talking, so how does he just suddenly also end up at the Broddie home, again, in the middle of the night at like 3 in the morning? It didn't really help, so unfortunately that didn't really help Mueller's case despite their greatest efforts. The fact of the matter is this guy got drunk and committed a serious mistake that was going to affect him for, you know, pretty much the rest of his life. And, I mean, in the end, as far as I'm concerned, Mueller got off pretty light. He was convicted ultimately of manslaughter, which in a lot of these cases, again, where there's lots of little reason for doubt, and there's alcohol involved, and there's no premeditation, a lot of times, even when you go from the desired first-degree murder to a second-degree murder, it often ends up being manslaughter, almost always. So at the end of October, Peter Mueller is convicted on manslaughter, which certainly makes the trouble he's in a little bit easier, and he's sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. So I get the feeling if the guy behaved himself, he was probably only in prison for a couple of years. And what's so sad is even by that point, you know, here the guy's able to get a manslaughter charge. He's probably only going to do a couple years in prison for drunkenly going into a guy's home and then shooting him point blank in the chest. Drunk or not, you ruined a family, you know. And still after that, after this guy pretty much escapes with like probably just going to jail for a couple years, prison for a couple years, his dad still tried to do everything in his power to pretty much get him off. He begged law enforcement to pretty much parole him with the promise that he would go back to Norway and that his dad would like provide financial help to the Broddie family. Like, it'd almost be like a bribe. I'll give them some money to help them survive now that they're, I mean, it's 1913. I'm assuming Minnie was probably not working. Just the circumstances of the time, she probably wasn't working and just at home taking care of the kids. Charles Broddie's probably the main breadwinner. So now, like, what are they going to do for financial support? So the guy offered to pay, you know, the Broddies some money, and the trade-off would be he gets his son to not have to go to prison, and oh, his son will come back to Norway, because Lord knows when he comes back to Norway, he won't shoot anybody there. But yeah, that didn't quite, the law enforcement didn't quite go for that. The whole, here's some cash in exchange for a father's life, and pretty much paying no penalty for that act. So in the end, again, Peter Mueller probably got off with a couple of years, I would assume. And boy, oh boy, was this a train wreck of a historic Murders of Portland episode to get through. From losing these to literally not having to go under here to do pretty much the whole video because the rain just started getting worse, and I couldn't get through like 30 seconds without this just getting all wet. Now this is practically dead, so it's just the whole thing a train wreck. But anyway, I managed to get through it. I managed to get to the site and get through the story, because honestly I don't know when I would have been in this area again and if I ever would have actually done this episode. So it would have just ended up being notes that just sat there, kind of like they were up the street about 30 minutes ago. So anyway, it is what it is. So all that said, that is the story of the murder of Charles Broddie in 1913 in his scow right on the Willamette right over here at the hands of the King of Scowtown himself, the legend, Peter Mueller. And as always, thank you so much for stopping by. Thank you so much for watching. Those of you that are new to the channel or you haven't gotten around to it, remember to like, share, subscribe. I'm really trying to keep my channel growing slowly but surely. I also have a Patreon account if you want to help me out there. Makes the work that I'm doing a whole lot easier, and I'm trying the best I can to stay busy and keep producing stuff while not completely overwhelming myself. So the link to my Patreon is in the description with this video, as well as the links to my Instagram, Facebook page I have for this channel, as well as my neglected Reddit subreddit that I also have. A few places for you to peruse. So All that said, thank you again for stopping by. Really appreciate it. This has been Steve, the Amateur Historian.